जय श्री कृष्णा। सनातन शक्ति में आज आपका स्वागत है। आज हमारे साथ है अभिषेक बैनर्जी। अभिषेक बैनर्जी likes to describe himself as writer, columnist, and a scientist. Though I do not know why the priority, but he's an extremely engaging person to speak with. अभिषेक जी, आपका बहुत बहुत स्वागत है।
Thank you, Vijita ji. Nice to be back with you.
तो बता दीजिए जरा कि आपका ये राइटर, कॉलमनिस्ट एंड साइंटिस्ट के पीछे क्या है? दो यू वर्क एट इंडियन इंस्टीट्यूट ऑफ साइंसेज, तो साइंटिस्ट पहले क्यों नहीं?
नहीं, ये तो दे आर इन नो पर्टिकुलर ऑर्डर। अब जो जिस अवतार में, यहाँ पे मैं राइटर और कॉलमनिस्ट के हिसाब से आया हूँ, तो वही पहले जाएगा। तो और कुछ नहीं है, देयर इज रियली नथिंग।
जी जी जी। तो आज अभिषेक जी हम आपसे बात करना चाह रहे हैं, जो यूएस ने अपना विड्रॉल किया है अफगानिस्तान से फोर्सेस का। So everybody is saying that 2 decades of hard work has gone back to square one. So I would like to hear your views on this subject.
Yeah, so let us begin from the beginning. We all know कि 9/11 का जो attack हुआ, obviously that was sponsored by the Taliban, or at least Al Qaeda was being sheltered, and Osama bin Laden was being sheltered and quartered and by the Taliban. And after that, the US decided to invade Afghanistan in late 2001 with all its allies, and they arrived with massive international support. They asked at that time, ये नाम तो उस समय के लोगों को बहुत familiar होंगे, but I think अभी आपके audience को शायद ये नाम याद भी ना आ रहे हो. There was the name of the man called Mullah Omar, who was the head of the Taliban at that moment. The US demanded that Osama bin Laden be handed over, but Mullah Omar refused, and then the United States decided to go in, right? And they went in a blaze of, with great determination. I remember the bombs that were being dropped. I was a kid back then. Some of the bombs, they were marked with FDNY, Fire Department of New York. So, they really felt they were on a mission to save the world. And they went and they dropped bombs. They got rid of the Afghan regime. And of course, under fire from the US, the Taliban regime was defeated quite easily. But then the question is, what happened after that, right? So first we have to think about what President Bush was thinking at the time this war happened. I mean, recently I was reading Bush's memoirs, as I'm talking about George, the younger Bush Jr., his memoirs from the time of 9/11. And, one of the things that I noticed in his memoirs, so he starts his by talking about something about abortion, then he talks about Iraq, he talks about Afghanistan, he talks about certain things in social security, Medicare reform. But by the end, when I got to the end of his book, what I realized was that Bush mentioned that, when he came into office, there were like some certain number of countries, about like 100 countries, which described themselves as democracies. And then by the time he left office, he says that, this number had gone up to like 150 or something. So if you read his memoirs, it's actually very transparent because, Bush W, unlike his father was a very intellectual kind of person, right? But Bush W was always seen as, the guy you would want to have a beer with. So he's very transparent. And that is one of the things that I actually used to love about Bush Jr. So if you read his memoirs, it's a very simple guy. He comes across as very forthright. And what he explains is that one of the things that he considers as great successes is that the number of countries that called themselves democracies went up during his tenure. So he had this very deep-seated belief. Of course, we can attribute cynical motives to it if you want, but I always felt he was not such a complicated person. But he felt he had a mission, or more generally, America had a mission to spread democracy around the world, at least at some level. Now, one can always come up with cynical motives, but at some level, he did feel that. And they felt certain amount of pride in getting rid of this despotic regime in Afghanistan. But now, if you look at it, if you look at the cost, now after hindsight, after the invasion of Iraq, after the invasion of Afghanistan, almost 20 years later, I mean, what does the transcript say? I mean, did invading these countries make the world a better place, or did it make the world a worse place? One has to look at it from that point of view. And if you look at it from that point of view, with benefit of this hindsight, Bush's original vision seems very naive at this point. It may feel sad, but it does seem naive. So what is happening on the ground? If we come back to strategic realities, I mean, the Americans are leaving. By January of 2020, already they had cut down their presence to just 2,500 troops. And when Biden came into office, the one Trump decision that he maintained was withdrawal from Afghanistan. I mean, that is what all the Americans have been wanting. That's universal public opinion in the US is totally in favor of this. Now, what is their calculation? They are saying, I believe it was in the year 2011 that Osama bin Laden was finally not captured, finally killed in Abbottabad in Pakistan. And now it's 2021. The Americans are saying we have been there for 20 years. This is America. This has been America's longest war. But what is the reality? The reality is that America is withdrawing in defeat. I mean, in 2001, when we heard that, the US is invading Afghanistan, we thought, chalo, Taliban ki ab khair nahi, it's over for them. Koi America ke saath kaun ladai jeet sakta hai? Koi nahi jeet sakta. But as stunning as it may be, one has to accept that Taliban did win that war. I mean, 2001, I think some of the people watching were maybe not too young. They might not have heard these terms like Northern Alliance. So at that time when the US invaded, there was this group of people called the Northern Alliance, which had been fighting the Taliban for a long time. And they had been caught up in the north of the country, on the border of Afghanistan and Tajikistan. And the US decided to help these people on the ground. So these people did a lot of the on-ground action. America supplied the weapons and the logistics. Of course, the US itself put boots on the ground. They opened Bagram Air Force Base near Kabul. But at that time, I used to hear, this is what I'm remembering from old broadcasts, is that Afghanistan is the graveyard of empires. The British tried to conquer Afghanistan. They could not. The Russians invaded in 1989. The Soviets tried it. They could not. And now I guess it's America's turn. It's always been the graveyard of empires. I mean, anybody who invades Afghanistan goes back in defeat. And no matter how the US and the global media try to spin this is a defeat. I mean, what they are withdrawing, what are the conditions? I mean, what else does it mean to be defeated? You go into a country, you say that you move one regime, then 20 years later, you sign unconditional withdrawal and go back. I mean, that is the definition of defeat. So, the US propaganda, official US state propaganda says it's impossible to win the war in Afghanistan in a conventional sense. That may be true. But the most important point here is that, it is possible to be defeated in a conventional sense. And that is exactly what has happened to the US right now. And what else does it mean? You sign a treaty for unconditional withdrawal and go home. That's what defeat is.
Very well said. Actually, my question, next question stems from a statement which you made in your while you were explaining that Afghanistan is the graveyard. Why? What is so particular? What is so? They don't have best of the weapons. They don't have best of the infrastructure. Then how come Afghanistan जो भी जाता है वो जीत के वापस नहीं आता? तो ऐसा क्यों हो रहा है?
I mean, it's almost impossible to say. I mean, I was listening to some broadcast, and this is one of the things that even Biden's political enemies are not criticizing him. I mean, back in the US, and I was listening to one of these Fox broadcasts, which, as you know, Fox is extremely against Biden, and they're like, "Well, the Chinese get into Afghanistan, great, let them keep it." I mean, they are so fed up with Afghanistan. They are like, "Well, the Chinese can have Afghanistan for all I care," because I guess what it shows is, this is one of the things that I was saying, that if you read Bush's memoirs, it feels like he had this sort of naive belief that everyone across the world values the same things that we tend to value. Things like democracy, liberty, freedom. And I guess that's just not a fair description of every part of the world. I mean, the Afghans, many people in Afghanistan, maybe they just don't care as much. I mean, and honestly, sometimes we hear certain things from certain groups of people that we tend to dismiss as, well, this guy is just brainwashed. But they do tend to contain certain truths. I mean, if you listen to Gaddafi, right? Gaddafi is dead as well, right? He's the Libyan dictator. Gaddafi had once said something. We tend to dismiss these people. They are brainwashed, they're crazy, they're dictators. But maybe they are saying what is true in their society. Gaddafi had said that we love death like the infidels love life. Now, for someone like me, who lives in like a free world, that sentence seems like, come on, that can't possibly be true. And we tend to reject it. No, but I mean, from the wisdom of what we have seen after the Afghan war, after the Iraq war, maybe it's true for certain I mean, it's impossible for me to say. I mean, I don't belong to the. I mean, it's impossible for me to understand how somebody in the Taliban thinks. Right? It's not possible for someone like me to imagine what a guy in the Taliban thinks like. So I guess if in a country, if the Taliban, they have the approach that they love death like the so-called infidels love life. They don't care about anything else. I mean, they don't. I mean, I was watching some of these recent videos that coming out of Afghanistan. One of the things that struck me was, why are these people not wearing a mask? Now, we are so used to seeing masks everywhere. My first thing is, back in the 2001 and all, I used to see all these Taliban guys with these things around their faces, right? Because they would try to keep themselves hidden because they would be like, if we got caught, then, somebody will come and kill us. But now they have come out with uncovered faces because they know America is going away. There's nothing to fear. But I'm like, but wait, America might be going away, but did the coronavirus also sign a withdrawal agreement? I don't think so. But they don't seem to care because they don't really worry about life. So, I mean, all our fundamental assumptions depend on the idea that, this idea of life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, that everyone values life, everyone values liberty, everyone values pursuit of happiness. Now, if there is somebody who does not believe in life, somebody who doesn't enjoy liberty and who doesn't want happiness, it kind of destroys our entire paradigm of looking at the world. So, you come into a country, maybe the British go in, the Soviets go in, the Americans go in, and they're like, we'll make life difficult for you. But if somebody doesn't even love life, what do you do? What do you do with at that point? So,
I want to interject here. See, I had a student who was son of one of the ministers of Afghanistan. And I mean, he was like a regular boy, I mean, coming from a good family, the way you expect a child to behave, a student to behave. So he told a very peculiar thing. He says, hey, ma'am, China is actually controlling everything in Afghanistan. When he was mentioning about some big dam project, I don't remember the name of the project right now. And he said the project was given to the local Afghani contractors. Then Chinese came in and they had almost like a terror attack. They bombarded everything, and then none of the contractors would take this project. And ultimately, the project was awarded to China, to one of the Chinese company. See, when you say that they don't care about their life, so possibly a group of Taliban might not be caring about their life. What about the normal Afghani citizen? How would you explain the turmoil the normal Afghani citizen would be going through?
No, I mean the ordinary common citizens of Afghanistan. I mean they are in panic. I mean, and you can see that. I was just watching that. They are standing in front of their own government offices begging for passports. I mean, if there is one group of people in the world that right now that I feel absolutely terrible for, it's the common people of Afghanistan. I was just reading an hour ago. Some handles were putting out that the Taliban, it has just taken over one border crossing with Pakistan, from what I heard.
Yes.
That they have just put out, and they have asked the local imams and the mosque people to provide lists of all the women between the ages of 15 and 45. I mean, it's just this is not confirmed. I mean, do we have to really elaborate? I mean, it's obvious why.
Oh.
But the thing is, this I have not read from a confirmed news source, but I would not be surprised at all if it was true. I mean, what else do you expect? And I mean, yeah, I can only imagine the condition of particularly women trapped in Afghanistan right now. But yes, a lot of ordinary people living in cities, at least, at the very least. The ones in cities, from what I've seen, they are in panic. They are begging for passports so that they can, somehow apply to some country for asylum. I mean, I don't even know. I mean, it's a long journey from getting a passport to getting asylum in some foreign country. That's a long journey. My heart breaks when I see those people in long lines. I honestly don't know what they are going to do. But what really bothers me, if you ask me, I listened very closely to Biden's press conference, which he was addressing the withdrawal from Afghanistan. What really bothers me is that, America is leaving these people to die. That's what is happening right now, right? Isn't that? I mean, these people, they give us these big lectures that, they will handle freedom and they care about humanity. If there is a water cannon used in Delhi somewhere, they will come saying, oh my God, humanity has been murdered in Delhi. There is water cannon on the street. But, that is for me. I mean, I can't really ask questions of the Taliban, right? I mean, the Taliban, they're like wild animals. I mean, what can I expect from the Taliban? But from the US, I would say that this is kind of shocking. Yes, I know that they're supremely frustrated. They're like, let whatever happen to the country happen to the country. But the bottom line is, these are real people. These are real people that they are leaving to die at the hands of the Taliban. And what does it really signal? And why is America able to pull this off? And why are ordinary Americans not reacting anymore? It is because there is now a growing sense inside America itself that America has lost leadership of the world. That's why I keep going back to Bush's memoirs. If you go back to Bush's memoirs, his father was part of the Cold War, right? His father. So they had this mentality, they had this sense of duty towards the world. It can be hypocritical, it can be to their advantage, always to their advantage. Of course, every king finds its own advantage. But at some level, they did feel that, if there is a despotism somewhere, if there is somebody who's cruel or evil somewhere, it's part of their responsibility to do something about it. But now Americans today, they have both lost their sense of leadership in the world and they have lost their sense of duty towards the world. And Trump was essentially the person who embodied this spirit, right? Because his campaign was America first. And he really tapped into this sentiment that Americans felt that, America does a lot for the world. That's their point of view. I'm not saying they actually do, but from their point of view, they do a lot for the world, but the world does not fully appreciate that. Trump said, I will even make the South Koreans pay for, they are not paying up properly for the troops that we maintain in the Korean Peninsula. So there was this sense of anger. So the Trump phenomenon is actually very interesting. There was this sense of anger that Americans were feeling that, South Korea, they take us for granted. The NATO allies, Trump was very angry that the NATO allies were not even paying their basic dues. So they are like, look at these countries like Lithuania, Estonia, who is guaranteeing their liberty? It is American troops who are guaranteeing them that now all these countries, they believe that, America is going to defend us from Russia anyway. So these countries have not paid their NATO dues. This sense of being, fleeced by the world, this was a real sense. And there was truth to it as well. There was truth to it. I mean, why did these countries pay their NATO dues? There's something wrong over there. The countries in South Korea wasn't paying properly for US troops to maintain their position over there. Now, this anger was there. But why? But when does somebody get angry and defensive about this? When somebody is really powerful and they can feel that, they are like a superpower, then they have a sense of generosity comes with that sense of superpower. So, there are these feelings that are marching together. Of course, if you are a big and powerful, there will be some people who will try to take a bit of advantage of you. That's going to happen. Anytime you are rich and successful, somebody or the other is going to come and take a little bit of advantage. But the thing is, when you are powerful enough, you tend not to mind. But when you are slowly realizing that your circumstances are becoming harder, then you start checking every line and crossing every T, checking every I. That why did this guy not pay me back? That's what happens, right? If you just got a promotion, you go take your friends to a hotel, you don't really care about who paid for the wine. But suppose you are getting into a little bit of hard times, then you start thinking, hey, that day I just had a salad, that guy had 2 entrees. Why did we split the bill half and half? You tend to start quibbling over this, right? So it's both ways. Some of it is true, some of it is not true. But what does it say? It says that Americans are slowly becoming less and less confident about the world. They're like, hey, is that guy taking advantage of us? They're really suspicious. Yeah, but the point is, the big point here is that America has abandoned people to die.
So I wanted to ask you another question which is related. A few years back, I had met a very powerful Singaporean business. So he told me that in Singapore, whatever is the investment coming in, America gets straight 2% out of it. I mean, I do not know. Is it official? What is it? And the similar thing I heard from a banker in Dubai. So, and this banker in Dubai was telling me that even $1 million transaction, which is what, 7 crores around, even that smaller transaction is scrutinized by Americans. So what is this all thing about America, some money going to America? What is it about?
So, I mean, I do not know specifically about the Singapore and US relations, but one thing I can tell you is that, yes, the amount of vigilance that the US government maintains on financial transactions around the world, it is sort of extraordinary. I mean, if any other country tried to do this, they would be refused flatly.
नहीं, तो
Because,
वो हो गया ना कि मतलब बड़ा गुंडा वाली
yes,
बात हो गई
yes,
कि
yes,
आप
absolutely,
आप
absolutely.
देख रहे हो, you have self declared yourself as
Yes,
monitor of the world,
yes,
और
yes,
फिर आप
absolutely.
सब पे निगाह रख रहे हो,
Yes,
तो
yes.
इसका मतलब क्या?
Yes, I mean, there is this thing, I think it's called FATCA. Right? And you know, every bank in the whole world, even including in India, even a mutual fund in India has to do FATCA compliance. That is, you know, you have to do, if you are opening a basic mutual fund account, or and I think even a bank account now in India, you have to have FATCA compliance. That is, you have to prove that you have to, you know, give in writing that you are not a US person. That is, a US person means somebody who has residency, not necessarily only citizenship, residency. So suppose there's a permanent residence, or you don't have some interest in the US, so you have to declare. Now, FATCA is not, as far as I know, FATCA is not an Indian law. Then why does an Indian bank, somebody opening a mutual fund account in India, have to do FATCA compliance? It's not. I'm in India. Why am I? FATCA is a US law. Why am I complying with it? Well, you know, India can refuse. India can say that I will not ask my banks to do FATCA compliance. Any country, the US will not force you. But what the US will do is that, okay, if your country does not do FATCA compliance, then you are cut off from the American financial system, which no country is capable of doing, right? If America says that, you know, all banks, all American banks, all American businesses will stop doing business with you, no country can survive like that. So, you know, America brings out something and says, well, you have to get every single person. Now, this is a very small thing for an ordinary person opening some mutual fund account. I'm sure for businesses, these burdens would be even bigger, but it's just a small example of how America maintains vigilance of financial transactions around the world. I mean, this sounds absolutely absurd. Imagine if India passed a domestic law and said any person, whether he's opening a bank account in Greenland, in France, or Germany, has to give in writing that they are not cheating any taxes from the Indian government. Will France listen? Will Germany listen? Will Greenland listen? Nobody will listen. But America has passed a law, FATCA, and said everybody has to listen. But of course, they are not forcing anybody. If you don't listen to them, you are cut off from the American financials. It's not forcing. So
Deplatforming, as you
yeah,
had said in your
deplatforming, exactly. It's like deplatforming, absolutely. Then you cannot be part of the American financial system. You choice आपकी है.
तो अभिषेक जी वापस आते हैं अफगानिस्तान और तालिबान पे। ये तालिबान शुरू कैसे हुआ, ये भी बड़ी इंटरेस्टिंग है। तो आप हमारे दर्शकों को अगर बताएं कि तालिबान इतना बढ़ा कैसे कि अब तो इनकी पैरेलल गवर्नमेंट क्या, इनकी डोमिनेटिंग गवर्नमेंट है, और जो वहां की गवर्नमेंट है वो चुप बैठी हुई है। तो इसके बारे में जरा बताएं।
Yeah, so the moment, see, honestly, one has to divide after World War II. So after World War II, then there is the collapse of the Soviet Union in 91. Then there is 9/11 attack in 2001, and now we have 2021. So honestly, ये जैसे होता है ना, unless we divide the history into these pieces, we cannot really understand it. This is like, you know, at the end of the Mahabharat war, where, you know, the Duryodhan is struck below the waist, and Balram comes in and says, you know, I'm going to cut off his head because he has done this horrible deed. And then Krishna rushes in and says that, you know, the yug has changed. Now a new yug has arrived. So the rules of the previous age don't apply. So in that sense, you have to look at 9/11. So what happened after 9/11, you have to consider it as completely separate from what happened before 9/11. It is like that. I mean, you know, you have to tell Balram, stop. New yug has come. Now the rules of the old age don't apply. So now if we open the history, then of course it's extremely embarrassing situation, because I mean, if you go back into the past, if you look at the post World War to 1991 period, I mean, the Americans, the West in general, the so-called Free West, is extremely close and on very cordial terms with the unfree parts of the Muslim and Arab world, right? I mean, and of course, the reason behind that is oil. I mean, there is what is called the Arab American Oil Company, Aramco, which I believe is
Aramco.
is one of the biggest oil companies in the world. I mean, who is behind all this? I mean, of course, and you know, one can try to see history as a morality play, but history is never a morality play. And you know, just because America is powerful, everybody turns their finger at them and says, you know, oh, you are hypocrites. But everybody is hypocrites. If you see the progress of our own history, It's essentially the same thing. I mean, we in the beginning we started out claiming that Israel is our big enemy. For some random reason, we said Israel is our enemy. Why? Because our interests were more in common with the Arabs. Then in between, at some point, we started saying, no, Israel is our friend, the Arabs are our enemy. Now we are saying, no, both are our friends. So you can take any country in the world and you will get a similarly hypocritical history. But yes, because America is so powerful, America's hypocrisies drive a lot of world history. So I don't want to say that, I don't want to turn this into some kind of focused America bashing, which is what the left is do. You can take any country in the world, including India, it hurts me to say, but you will see the same level of hypocrisy exists in everybody's foreign policy. So there's nothing specific to America. But yes, after World War II, I mean, the Arabs, they were very close allies of the US, Arabs and generally the rest of the Muslim world, including Pakistan. Pakistan was part of SEATO, which was the South Asian version of NATO. And the reason for that is at that time, America's biggest interest consisted of stopping communism. Now, whatever else the Arabs were into, one of the things that the Arabs and the unfree parts of the Muslim world were never into was communism. They were dead set against communism, which incidentally India was not. So that's how India, despite being a democratic country, sort of went. We never were really an enemy of America, but we were not exactly friends, right? Till 1991 or even until 95, 96, India and America they weren't exactly friends. So, but rather the other country, I mean, for instance, Pakistan was always a much closer ally of the United States than India ever was. Now again, things may have changed, and there's hypocrisy on all sides. So at that time, in order to resist the communists, right? So when the communists, they decided to go into Afghanistan in, I think it's 1980. I might be getting it wrong. 1985, I believe, the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. So when the Soviets they started, they came in. America's priority was to stop the Soviets. So they went in there and said that these people, they decided to arm the Mujahideen fighters. I mean, one still pulls out those. There are still those embarrassing articles from the New York Times and Washington Post that people still share on Twitter and Facebook, saying they have a picture of Osama bin Laden and says, warrior for liberty puts his army on the road to peace. So these things happen. I mean, you can even, the great Ronald Reagan, he invited the Haqqanis. I mean, the Haqqanis are like the biggest, terrorist godfathers in the world. But when the Haqqanis came to the White House, Ronald Reagan compared them to the founding fathers of the United States. So these things, I mean, compared kiya bhi to kya? I mean, you're taking Haqqani, who's the biggest terrorist godfather in the world, and comparing him to and Jefferson and Madison.
मतलब एक बोलना चाहूंगी कि अमेरिका के फोल्ड में आ गया कोई तो वॉशिंग मशीन से धुल के प्योर एंड पायस हो गया.
Yeah, so ये तो होता है. Now the thing is, now all I want to focus and I want to emphasize this, ये किसी एक देश को पकड़ती, we cannot say कि यही लोग ऐसे कर. सब लोग कर रहे हैं. I mean, ये जो गधे को बाप बनाने की जो ये प्रक्रिया है, सबको करना पड़ता है. This has to be done internationally. Now internationally this is done all the time. Domestically also this is done all the time. I mean, hypocrisy को, I mean, this kind of hypocrisy is there in everyone, in every organization that exists in the world. They have to have this kind of diplomatic approach. So we cannot get into a morality play. But yes, it is a fact that at the time the US found it in its advantage to arm the Mujahideen. They created this group, the Taliban. As far as I know, the word Talib means a student. So the Bhuttos, because the Bhuttos, they were seen as the westernized agents of America who would set up this army of freedom. So it's the Bhuttos who set up this chain of madrasas. Right, and the students who studied there all day, they came to be known as the Talibs, the Taliban. So then the Taliban, they come in, and now in between the Cold War ends, yeah.
जो ये तबलीगी है, ये भी स्टूडेंट, इसका रूट वर्ड स्टूडेंट ही है.
Yes. So now it's a question of which kind of learning is when in your favor. I mean, at that time, and yes, I mean, on a practical sense. At the end of the day, the Taliban or the Mujahideen, they were just a group of armed nomads. And the Soviets, they had 30,000 nuclear warheads. If you think from that point of view, maybe yes, what would you do? If I was in their position, I would perhaps have made the same choice. I would have said that, the Mujahideen, they are less of a threat. Yes, they are less of a threat than the Soviet Union. I mean, the Soviet Union had 30,000 nuclear warheads. I mean, they can blow up the world. The Mujahideen cannot. So from that point of view, it did make sense for them to bring the Mujahideen on board. But in that process, they ended up creating this monster. Now, in 1996, by 1996, America had lost interest in that region, right? Because the Cold War was over and they no longer had a battle to fight over there. So they had gotten out. Now, as it happens, once you arm these crazy people, they are going to take on a life of their own. They turned against the current that government of Afghanistan. And in 1996, I believe, they marched into Kabul. And I was very young then, and I heard that, they took the president of Afghanistan and they hanged him from, I'm sure you remember this incident. His name was Najibullah. He was hanged in the public square, and, they came in and instituted Sharia law. They forbade lipstick, singing, women going to school, and all sorts of things. Then by 2001, I mean, Pakistan was encouraging that, right? Because Pakistan saw that, the Taliban was deeply infiltrated. And essentially, the Taliban was an instrument of the Pakistani army and ISI. Now, so they saw it as a counterweight to India, because Pakistan has always been very nervous about India's influence in Afghanistan, which was quite substantial. Because, even now, India, we just closed the Kandahar consulate, but India maintains 4 consulates in Afghanistan: Kabul, Kandahar, Herat, and Mazar-e-Sharif. We operate 4 consulates. And Pakistan has always complained that how many visas are we really issuing over there? I mean, that we need 4 consulates. So obviously it is it's an outpost of Indian influence, and India has very solid influence in Afghanistan, and that has always made Pakistan very, very worried, because on one side they have India, and the other side, if there is Indian influence in Afghanistan, it's a scary situation for them. And Pakistan always, their view was that someday or the other the Americans are going to get fed up and leave. That was always their long game. And one has to admit, yeah, their gamble was not wrong. And what shocks me, however, is the speed with which the Americans have withdrawn and the face that they are putting up in front of the world. I mean, what did the Americans get in return? I mean, when they signed that agreement with the Taliban, this was, I believe, in Doha in September last year. In February, they had already signed an agreement. Then in February, they again met in Doha. And the agreement that they have made is that, America will pull out of Afghanistan, and in return, the Taliban will not allow anti-American activities on their soil. I mean, this is a face saver. I mean, do you really think that the Taliban is not going to allow any anti-American activities? I mean, even America does not care. They just need to show that, we have also got something. They have to
we
show
also got
something. And they are going back in defeat. And Biden was asked about it. Biden was asked about it in the press conference. Mr. President, do you trust the Taliban? And Biden said, is that a serious question? He said, yes, it's an absolutely serious question. Biden says, no, I don't trust the Taliban. Okay, so then what are you withdrawing for? The agreement says that the Taliban has agreed in good faith not to have anti-American activities on their soil. Biden says, I don't trust the Taliban on that. Then what the hell are you withdrawing for? The fact is that you are withdrawing in defeat. That's just a fact. And it was actually quite shocking to see Biden lie through his teeth when he says that well, the Afghans, the Afghan army, we have armed them and they are capable of defending their country as well as anyone else, which is a lie, because first of all, US intelligence itself estimated that it will be 6 months before the civilian government falls. From what we see right now, it might not even be 6 weeks.
Yes.
So, and I mean, so Taliban has taken over 85% of the country, and I don't know if the Americans will be able to complete their withdrawal of August 31st before. I mean,
before they take over.
Even the Taliban is standing outside the gate of Kabul. That's probably what is going to happen. And so Biden is just standing there and lying through his teeth that they are able to defend their country like anyone else. And you can tell he's lying, because the next sentence he goes and says, well, if you look at the history of Afghanistan, they have never really been a united country. So, okay, their hypocrisies aside, their interests aside, from our point of view, what should we learn about the world? Especially, what message would I like to give to all the people who love to read the New York Times and the Washington Post and post about how woke they are? You see, nobody is really on your side. They picked up a country because they had some interest over there. And now the country is in a mess. They are leaving those people to die at the hands of the Taliban, and they are like, well, they weren't ever really united, so who cares? So tomorrow this might happen to your country too, or any other country for that matter. So don't trust these globalists at the New York Times and the Washington Post. That keep in mind, why am I being so severe on Biden? Because Biden has always been part of the foreign policy establishment. Biden has been in Washington for 3 decades. He is part of that interventionist Cold War club. These are people, when Biden was coming into power, they said Biden is going to renew America's alliances all around the world. He's going to bring back American leadership. No, he's not going to bring back American leadership. They don't give a damn. Trump was different, because see, Trump told you upfront. With Trump, you got what You got exactly what was advertised. Trump came to power saying all the other countries of the world are fleecing us, they're cheating us. America, I'm going to put our country first and we'll get the hell out of everybody's business and let the whole world go and die. So Trump was like as advertised. But Biden's case is different. Biden is like, we have decided to be a force for good in the world, in every corner of the world, wherever there is injustice, America will be there to fight it. Except that we leave the Afghans to die at the hands of the Taliban. So with Trump, you got exactly what was advertised. He would tell you, if he's screwing you, he's going to tell you, I'm going to screw you over. That was on the foreign policy front. What was Trump's promise to the Americans? It was America first, screw the world. Right. So when he's already declared, screw the rest of the world, we know exactly what we are getting. But with Biden, we didn't get that. But with Biden, is like, oh, did somebody use water cannons in Delhi? Oh, we are so worried about human rights. Oh, these people are going to die at the hands of the Taliban? Well, the country's always been like that. So it's really nothing. So beware, this wolf in sheep's clothing. That's what you're getting with that. That's the real part.
So Abhishek ji, we had Abdul Ghaffar Khan from Afghanistan, I think.
Northwest Frontier province. Yeah.
Province. So Afghanistan, where there were Banyan Buddhas, which Taliban just bombarded, and so is geographical entity का, मैं देश तो नहीं बोलूँगी, it's very different. इस पूरे region का इतना radicalization कैसे?
Yeah, I mean, this region has mostly been because it has been ungovernable for a very long time. And when this region is ungovernable, then this radical philosophy, it has taken over that region. I mean, it's actually sad to see that how the Bamiyan Buddhas were destroyed. And one of the things that we have to talk about is, the conquest of Taliban in Afghanistan. It brings our own CAA to sharp focus. Because if there is a time when CAA is needed, now is the time. I mean, if on the one hand, we are worrying about what is the fate of common people in Afghanistan, think about the fate of the so-called idol worshippers, the people that they call idol worshippers. You think about their situation. I mean, it is scary to even think. It's better not to think about their situation.
यहाँ पे मैं बताऊंगी, हमारे दिल्ली में गुरुद्वारा बंगला साहब है और जो वहां पे है नॉर्थ ईस्ट प्रोविंस तो ज्यादातर सिख कम्युनिटी है। तो नॉर्थ में ये जो हमारा बंगला साहब गुरुद्वारा बंगला साहब है, वहां पे हम एक स्टडी कर रहे थे, तो वी मेट फैमिलीज जिनकी बात सुन के आप विश्वास नहीं करेंगे कि ऐसा भी हो सकता है। लड़की अगर घर से बाहर निकल गई या घर के अंदर भी उठा के ले गए, माँ को मार दिया, रेप, मर्डर, प्लंडर, आर्सन, it's really bad.
And what worries me is that what makes me very is that we tend to talk of these people as if they are already dead.
हाँ, आपको वैसे तो आप कहते हैं
just as much alive as you and me.
Yes, and पूरे गांव के गांव 2-2 हजार पॉपुलेशन के गांव, they have been given ultimatum कि कल या तो गोली से आप मर जाइए या कन्वर्ट हो जाइए। अब आप देखिए, और आप जो बात कह रहे हैं वो बिल्कुल सही है। अगर वो धर्म की रक्षा हेतु खड़े हुए हैं और परिवर्तन नहीं कर रहे हैं, तो हम सबकी रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी बनती है कि हम उनको वापस लेके आए, बिकॉज दे आर बेसिकली ये सारी उनके ऊपर जो हो रहा है वो सिर्फ अपनी धर्म की रक्षार्थ हेतु हो रहा है।
Yes.
तो
and this really bothers me that we have long decided that there is a certain part of the world where the basic rules of humanity or liberty simply don't apply at all. I mean, and that is what bothers anything. Afghanistan to reh nahi dijiye, even Pakistan. Whenever we say the term Pakistani Hindu, it's almost like, this person cannot be helped, as if this person is already dead. The rest of the world speaks about, and I've noticed this, even when we talk about Pakistani Hindus and to some extent Bangladeshi Hindus also, we talk about them as if they're not even alive anymore. So, what can you do? These people are
already dead. They are some species going to be extinct.
Yes,
हम सबके दिमाग में रहता है कि अभी है चलो 2-4 पुश्तों में ये कन्वर्ट हो जाएंगे
Yes,
या
we
मर
never,
जाएंगे.
yeah, we forget that, these are actual people who are actually alive. And this is not just the case with Pakistan, Afghanistan, or Bangladesh. We tend to do this with all parts of the Muslim world. I mean, for instance, people talk about Israel, right? In Israel, there is this question of, the whole world worries about the Palestinian refugees and this, that. If you look at a country like Egypt, the entire Middle East used to be full of Jews. If you look at a country like Egypt, around the end of the Second World War, Egypt's Jewish population was 80,000. So that's a very substantial number of people. Can you guess how much it is today? At the last count, which was in the year 2011, the number of Jews living in Egypt was 8.
Oh my God.
From 80,000, they are down to 8. That was 2011. It's 2021. I have a feeling it has now become 0. So, they have gone from 80,000 to 8. They have been exterminated. They have fled. Either they have, a lot of them have fled to Israel. Nobody talks about this thing. Ethiopia. From Ethiopia, Israel had to rescue the Jews. From Ethiopian Jews, they were airlifted. They got, and incidentally, the most packed aircraft in history was actually a Boeing plane, a Boeing 747 plane, which carried 1,008 Jews out of Ethiopia and brought them to Israel. So, these people, they have been evacuated. Now, what Israel did was, Israel, to its credit, at least evacuated the Jews. But we did not do that, right? Instead, we got stuck into all our theory about secularism and liberalism and humanity. So, liberalism defined to be anything that considers Hindu Pakistanis to be dead is considered liberalism. So, we did not even do that. And of course, the world does not give a damn. And in general, the world has decided that if you are in the Muslim world, the rules don't apply to you. So if the Jews, they are being exterminated in the Muslim world, the world does not care. If the so-called idol worshippers, they are exterminated from the Muslim world, the rest of the world doesn't give a damn. They're in India, honestly, in this region, this is our moral responsibility, right? Because these are essentially people of our Indosphere. If we cannot extend our rule over there, the least we owe them is a guarantee of security. But we are not even doing that. We have not even notified our CAA. At least to their credit, Israel took responsibility for the Jews over there. But we didn't even do that.
यहाँ पे एक छोटा सा इंसिडेंट बताना चाहूंगी मैं. तो आई वाज स्टडीइंग इन यूनिवर्सिटी ऑफ लंदन एंड दिस वाज अ स्कॉलरशिप प्रोग्राम, एरास्मस मुंडस स्कॉलरशिप थी, जिसमें the students were from all over the world. So we had an Egyptian fellow student. तो आपको तो पता ही है कि स्पेन में काफी समय तक मुस्लिम रूल रहा था.
Yes, Moors.
So and especially south of Spain.
Yes.
So he said, very with a lot of remorse, there was a story that Muslims would sharpen their knives, not knives, talwar, every day. And जो उनके मौलाना थे वो they would ensure. तो एक दिन जो राजा था उसने अपनी तलवार जो थी वो शार्पन नहीं की. तो उससे पूछा कि क्यों नहीं की आपने तलवार शार्पन. तो उसने कहा कि अरे वो मैं रात को लेट सोया था. रात को क्यों लेट सोया था? कि मैं गाने वगैरह सुनता. तो मौलाना ने कहा कि अब तुम गाने और ये इस तरह की चीजों में व्यस्त हो गए. नाउ योर रूल इज गोइंग टू finish. You are allowing the other to come in. उसने कोई एक फ्रेज यूज किया था, मुझे इस वक्त याद नहीं आ रहा. तो ये जितने भी देश हैं जहां पे वन कल्चर एंड वन रिलीजन सो टू से का है, वहां पे कोई भी अदर इवन डेमोक्रेसी पनप नहीं सकती. तो दिस इज वेरी वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट थिंग विच पीपल शुड realize, that it is not only the question of other religion or other thinking. This is also the question that even your democracy will not be able to survive with it.
Yes, and we tend to assume, of course, if you corner somebody and say, why don't you talk about these values in the unfree world, their answer is they will give some meta answer saying, overall at some point there will be reform and everybody goes towards freedom. That is a superstition. It is not. There is no universal law anywhere that says that ultimately any society will seek out freedom and get that freedom. It's more or less a superstition, and for some reason we have allowed one part of the world to completely get away. They have been completely excused from any sort of human values, and the way they have done it, is they have done a sort of end run around our modern sort of justice system. Because see, everything has advantages and disadvantages. The way our modern society, our modern jurisprudence is structured is that it focuses everything on individual responsibility, which is great. It's a wonderful way to do things, and generally speaking, that represents progress. But what we always have to remember is that everything has its disadvantages. I mean, even statistics mein agar aap dekhoge, there is something called type 1 error and there is type 2. Both are errors. If you want to minimize type 1 error, aapka type 2 error
बढ़ जाए.
there is no way to do both at the same time. So if you focus, if your society, if your laws, everything is built around individual responsibility, then you do miss out on counting group behavior. This is just a fact. This is not an argument to say that you should destroy individual liberty, but one has to be aware that there are downsides. I mean, for instance, इससे ज़्यादा downside तो क्या दिख सकता है? In COVID itself we saw, right? दो सुपर पावर आप देख लीजिए, one is China, one is America. चाइना ने 2 महीने में अपना कोविड कंट्रोल तो कर दिया ना, लेकिन अमेरिका को 1 साल लग गया एक दूसरे पर आरोप प्रत्यारोप. इंडिया में भी वही हुआ, सब एक दूसरे पर somebody is caught napping, सब एक दूसरे को किसकी गलती है, तुम्हारी गलती है, मेरी गलती है, सब एक दूसरे को नीचा दिखाने में लगे हुए हैं, और लाखों लोगों की जान चली गई. China got it done. Is this an argument for dictatorship? No, but you have to admit that their system of government, their totalitarianism does do certain things better than others. They are capable. So the thing is, अगर कोई society अगर totalitarian तरीके से behave करती है, तो उसके भी अपने कुछ aspects में advantages होंगे. Now, this is not, again, repeatedly, is not to advocate for totalitarianism, but it is to say that you cannot miss that they are better than you at getting certain things done. So for instance, उनकी जो totalitarian जो society है, उनका जो totalitarian सा जो culture है, that is very good at spreading itself and at sustaining itself. और इसके लिए उन्हें democracy की जरूरत नहीं है. So they have their own law, they have got their own old laws, and they are able to live by that, and they are able to maintain a higher degree of cohesion than our society. And this is a fact. We cannot run away from that fact. And they have been able to establish their rule. Now the point is when they come into contact with our democratic society. So it's about. So one has to manage this interface very clearly. So whenever people talk about XYZ phobia, the reason we are stuck about that is we cannot take one individual person and say you are responsible. But when एक entire society की collective thought process ही अगर ऐसी हो जाती है, एक entire society, if it is acting and behaving like a single individual, हमारा जो ये है कि of individual responsibility, कि तुमने क्या किया. The thing is, ये जो अगर आप society देखोगे, this unfree world, is there a single Egyptian? Because as I said, that from 80,000 it has come down to 8. Is there one single Egyptian जिसको आप पकड़ के बोल सकते हो तुमने किया है? You have exterminated this. It's very hard to find that one person. One single person, it's almost impossible to locate and blame that one person. It's the society as a whole that committed this crime against the Jews of Egypt, right? Who committed the crime? It's very hard to pin down and say one person did it. So, if there is a large group which is able to act as a single individual, it's a large group acting as a single individual, हमारा जो entire legal system है, हमारा जो entire thought process है, वो इसको capture ही नहीं कर पाता. We are not able to write it down. We are not able to say कि क्या किया है. So if I find one person, if I pick up one that, and I've met Egyptian students myself, आप किसी Egyptian को पकड़ के बोलोगे, in your country 80,000 Jews were revoked. I'm going to punish you. वो बोलेगा मैंने क्या किया है?
मैंने क्या किया?
It's almost impossible. आप उसको किसी भी कोर्ट के सामने, किसी इंटरनेशनल ट्राइब्यूनल के सामने आप किसी एक इजिप्शियन को पकड़ के बोलोगे, I will punish this man for what happened to the Jews of Egypt. बोलेगा what have I done? And honestly, by our current system of laws, it is impossible to define what that person has done wrong. लेकिन हुआ ना, all the Egyptians, all the entire society acting together pulled off a crime against humanity. And this is in some sense, this is the same thing that happens, और Egypt हमसे बहुत दूर है, but inside our country, Kashmir में, if you see what happened to the Kashmiri Hindus, it's again the same thing. हाँ, जो आतंकवादी है उसको तो आप पकड़ के आप अरेस्ट कर सकते, लेकिन जो आतंकवादी, टोटल नंबर ऑफ आतंकवादी इन कश्मीर आई थिंक इज बेयरली बाय इंडियन आर्मी एस्टिमेट्स नॉट इवन 1000, अभी तो आई थिंक सिर्फ फ्यू हंड्रेड पे आ गया है, 200-300 पे आ गया, राइट? सो यू नो पीपल एंड देन इट हैक्स आवर, सो यू नो, और फिर वो हमारे जो लिबर्टी का जो कॉन्सेप्ट है उसको शॉर्ट सर्किट करता है और बोलता है कि अगर पूरे कश्मीर में 200 आतंकवादी हैं, उनके लिए आपने पूरे वैली पर कम्युनिकेशन लॉकडाउन कर दिया, ये बंद कर दिया, कर्फ्यू लगा दिया, अफवाह लगा दिया, सिर्फ 200 लोगों के लिए। See, the problem is it's more than 200 people. 200 terrorists are there. उन 200 आतंकवादी में से हम लोग हर रोज 4-5 को पकड़ते हैं, कभी ना कभी ठीक है वो 200, 150, ठीक है 50 लोग कभी ना कहीं रह ही जाए, बट बॉटम लाइन उसको हम फाइट कर सकते हैं। बट पॉइंट इज कि एक लार्जर क्राइम भी चल रहा और उसको हमारा जो लैंग्वेज भी है, हमारा लैंग्वेज ना उसको डिफाइन कर पा रहा है, ना हमारे लॉज उसको डिस्क्राइब कर पा रहे हैं, बट समथिंग इज कमिंग फ्रॉम द वाइडर सोसाइटी, देयर इज समथिंग कमिंग फ्रॉम दैट वाइडर सोसाइटी, जो कि हमारी जो लैंग्वेज, हमारी बेसिक लैंग्वेज ही उसको कैप्चर नहीं कर पा रही, वी आर नॉट एबल टू डिफाइन। सो यू नो, ये जो डिड 200 पीपल रियली सेंड 5 लाख कश्मीरी हिंदूज आउट ऑफ द वैली? आई डोंट थिंक 200 पीपल आर केपेबल ऑफ पुलिंग दैट ऑफ। द वाइडर सोसाइटी डिड इट, बट हु डिड इट? आप किसी एक आदमी को नहीं पकड़ सकती, एंड दैट इज द प्रॉब्लम ऑफ आवर, एंड दैट इज द प्रॉब्लम ऑफ आवर current legal system, and even the way we talk. You know, we even say, collective responsibility is a bad thing, and yes, it is true, very horrific things have happened whenever you try to hold some group of people collectively responsible. That is true, but what I'm saying is that we have to be aware of the shortcomings of our own system, कि हमारा जो सिस्टम है ऑफ इंडिविजुअल राइट्स, इंडिविजुअल लिबर्टी, इंडिविजुअल फ्रीडम, उसके शॉर्टकमिंग्स क्या है, वी हैव टू बी अवेयर ऑफ दैट at the very least. I'm not saying do away with it, I'm saying just at least be aware of what we are not catching. It is like that type 1 and type 2 error. आप करिए, आपका your priority is reducing type 1 error, आप करिए, लेकिन आप ये मत भूलिए कि टाइप 1 एरर को मिनिमाइज करते करते आपका टाइप 2 एरर बहुत बढ़ा, आप उसको डिनाई नहीं कर सकते. What I object to, and this is my problem with liberals, is I don't object to their framing in terms of individual liberty, but what they do is they engage in denialism, which is a fact denialism, कि अगर मेरा ये जो लैंग्वेज है कि वो एग्जिस्ट ही नहीं करता, because I am not able to capture that, it does not exist. That is where I object. You know, so accept कि ठीक है, I'm not saying that pick up a random person and say you have sent all the Kashmiri Hindus out of the valley, now I'm going to punish you. Yes, that part I agree with the liberals. But फिर उसके बाद liberals बोलेंगे कि because you are not able to define that person's crime, the wider society, you cannot be aware of what the wider society did, and if you are aware, then you are suffering from XYZ phobia, and I'm going to fact check you and cancel you and do all sorts of things. So at least be aware of what we are missing. Be aware of what we are catching, but be aware of what we are also missing, and you cannot deny it.
यहाँ पे एक बार बहुत पहले जब मैं छोटी थी, तो मेरे मम्मी के ग्रैंडफादर, तो उनके वो अंग्रेजों के जमाने में थे, तो वो बता रहे थे कि अगर कोई क्राइम हो जाता था ना, तो जो वहां का अंग्रेजों के जमाने में जो पुलिस वाले होते थे ना, दे वुड से वी आर गोइंग टू पनिश द होल विलेज। तो वो जब वो होल विलेज की पर बात आती थी, तो जो क्रिमिनल था वो खुद ब खुद आगे आ जाता था। तो आप अगर आपको पता है और पता होते हुए भी आप उसके लिए कुछ कर नहीं रहे हैं, तो कहीं ना कहीं रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी आपकी आ जाती है।
Yeah, and this is what the world is a very difficult place. I mean,
सुब्रमण्यम स्वामी बहुत बार कह चुके हैं कि इंडिया शुड इंटरवीन इन अफगानिस्तान एंड डिवाइड पाकिस्तान इनटू 4 पार्ट। तो ये जो सुब्रमण्यम का जो ये कांस्टेंट जो उनका लाइन ऑफ थिंकिंग है, इसके बारे में आप क्या?
Yeah, so I mean, Subramanian Swamy is a very brilliant man. इसमें कोई डाउट नहीं. But Subramanian Swamy, if you ask me, 2 इंडिविजुअल्स हैं जो कि एग्जैक्टली एक है. एक अगर आप बिहार में किसी से पूछेंगे तो वो आपको एक बेसिक चीज बताएगा बिहार की राजनीति के बारे में, कि लालू यादव और नीतीश कुमार दोनों एक ही हैं. बस दोनों अपना जो सोच है उसको ऑपोजिट तरीके से लगाते हैं. अभी तो नीतीश कुमार की बहुत नीचे गिर चुका है, बट पहले बोलते थे कि नीतीश कुमार और लालू यादव आदमी एक ही, पर वो 2 अलग-अलग तरीके से करते हैं. उसी तरह सुब्रमण्यम स्वामी एंड मनमोहन सिंह, ये दोनों ना एक ही आदमी.
Really?
हाँ, बट ये दोनों अपना जो अप्रोच है उसको एकदम ऑपोजिट तरीके से यूज करते हैं, जिस वजह से एक आदमी बहुत ज्यादा सक्सेसफुल है और दूसरा आदमी बहुत ही ज्यादा अनसक्सेसफुल. So अगर आप मनमोहन सिंह को देखिए, मनमोहन सिंह ही इज आल्सो ब्रिलियंट, बट उसने हमेशा जो सत्ता में है, जो जिसके पास पावर है, जहां पे फायदा है, हमेशा उसके सामने सिर झुकाने का काम, और आज से नहीं 72 से किया है, जब वो इकोनॉमिक एडवाइजर था फाइनेंस मिनिस्ट्री में और बैठ के सोशलिज्म पर मुहर लगा रहा था। व्हेन ही वाज एट एज ऑफ 60, जब उसकी उम्र 60 साल की थी, मनमोहन सिंह को समझ में आया कि सोशलिज्म इज ऑल रॉन्ग, तब तक वो उसी को चला रहा था। बट यू सी, मनमोहन सिंह ने वो करते करते in the final calculation 91 रिफॉर्म्स में उसकी बहुत बड़ी भूमिका रही। So because he kept cooperating with power, उसने अपने लिए भी अच्छा किया और दूसरों के लिए भी अच्छा किया, right? Because he had this practical sense of cooperating with power. He never stood up to power. This is one of Manmohan Singh's traits. लेकिन सुब्रमण्यम स्वामी भी वही आदमी है, उसकी भी सोच वैसी ही है, बट सुब्रमण्यम स्वामी ने हमेशा उल्टा किया। जो भी पावर में है उसके साथ वो सीधे जाकर के भिड़ जाता है, और इस वजह से क्या हुआ, ना वो अपने लिए कुछ कर पाया अपनी लाइफ में, ना वो दूसरों के लिए कुछ कर पाया। So these are the two extremes. I'm not saying be one or the other. I'm saying there is something to learn from both, from the life of Manmohan Singh and from the life of Subramanian Swamy. मनमोहन सिंह ने हमेशा सत्ता में जो है उसकी चाटुकारी में अपनी जिंदगी लगाई, और इससे अल्टीमेटली द फाइनल कैलकुलेशन उसने अपना भी भला किया है और दूसरों का भी भला किया। और सुब्रमण्यम स्वामी ने हमेशा उल्टा किया, उसकी जितनी इंटेलिजेंस है, आईक्यू है, उसने हमेशा सत्ता के साथ बेवजह, कोई वजह हो ना हो, लड़ाई करने में ही लगाया, और इससे ना वो खुद अपनी लाइफ में, मतलब ठीक है, ऑफ कोर्स स्वामी इज सक्सेसफुल बाय माय स्टैंडर्ड्स, बट बाय हिज ओन स्टैंडर्ड्स, जहां पर उसको होना चाहिए था, ही हैज नॉट रीच्ड देयर, राइट? ही हैज नॉट फुलफिल्ड हिज ओन पोटेंशियल। सो ना वो अपना पोटेंशियल फुलफिल कर सका, ना वो दूसरों का भला। So that is what I would say about this individual Swami. Yes, again, he is the long-term goal that he has set. That, one should break Pakistan. That should be our aim. But at the moment, see, this is easy for someone who doesn't have any responsibility to say. But at the moment, is it really possible for us? I mean, ये अभी हमारा कोविड चल रहा है, अभी थर्ड वेव ऑलरेडी शुरू हो चुका है, मतलब झूठ बोला जा रहा है कि नहीं शुरू हुआ है, बट थर्ड वेव has already begun. Country, we have taken this big economic hit. America is pulling out of Afghanistan. Intervene. I mean, China वहां बैठा हुआ है. Where is the question of India being able to intervene in Afghanistan? I mean, this is China's finest hour. I mean, COVID has made China super power बनने में जितनी थोड़ी सी कसर रह गई थी वो पूरी हो गई. So China is now a hegemonic superpower. अभी जाकर उसके साथ भिड़ के I don't see हमें मिलेगा क्या. I mean, it's more about, and if you want to listen to what the Chinese did. I mean, I think it was Deng Xiaoping जिसने कहा था कि conserve your strengths. अपना strength दबा के रखो, चुपचाप बैठो, और एक दिन तुम्हारा भी time आएगा. When I went to China, so I went to the Chinese Academy of Sciences. So there were some pictures there of all the Chinese leaders. Of course, you have to have. So I actually went and got myself clicked with only one picture. That was Deng Xiaoping. Because I may not like Deng, but you have to accept that what Deng did was unprecedented in history. ये तो मानना पड़ेगा. I mean, he has done that. You have to achieve. You have to accept. And the Swami, I would say, is he's a great man, but sometimes listening to random instincts it will just lead you into strange corners जहां से कोई फायदा नहीं है. I'm not saying he's wrong. I'm just saying उसके जो अभी सोच है उससे कोई फायदा नहीं है. So
correct. So Abhishek ji, it was lovely talking to you as always. Here I would like my audience, please subscribe this channel. This is a new channel. We need all your support. We'll be with Abhishek ji once more in some time soon. Thank you so much.